From your point of view, right, we've talked about awareness as one of the impediments, but what other impediments or challenges to widespread technology adoption within the construction industry exists today? And like you were saying earlier, if you don't know that the solution exists, it's going to be hard to adopt it.
Yeah, I think on one hand is awareness, which I definitely see and hope that the newsletter helps with, but the other side is education, because once you know that there is a great solution out there, you still need to know how to pilot it effectively. What are the KPIs that track success? How do we actually operationalize the solution into workflow and create it as a habit so every engineer knows exactly when and where to use this solution? And then if it is effective in a pilot, how do we scale it through an organization?
Welcome to this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping engineering professionals find technology that fits their needs. In this episode, I will be talking with Bhragan Paramanantham, a professional engineer at AECOM on the Pavements Aviation team, a construction technology writer for Last Week in ConTech, and a software developer and educational content creator at AirDev, about some of the challenges and opportunities in adopting new technologies in the construction sector, the critical role of education in facilitating the shift, and the exciting potential impacts of emerging technologies in the industry. With that, let's jump into today's episode. Okay, it's now time for our conversation of the week. Bhragan, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Nick. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me here.
Likewise, yeah. And hey, we've got a lot to talk about. I know we were just catching up in the couple of minutes leading up to hitting record here, but could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do on a daily basis at AECOM?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm a civil engineer down in Australia, and I've been writing this newsletter called Last Week in ConTech. And basically what it does is it serves as a summary of what's happening in the construction technology ecosystem. But moving towards my role here at AECOM, I work as a civil engineer in our pavements and aviation team. So on one side in pavements, I support in the design of pavement systems. And then on the other side in aviation, I work mostly in construction phase services, so supporting the team on the construction site and just ensuring design compliance as the clients are at. And recently, a new role that I've just been doing at AECOM is just working as an innovation advisor for an infrastructure project. So as part of their incubation and innovation hub, looking at different solutions and how we can increase the adoption of them.
Okay. So, Bhragan, you currently write a newsletter called Last Week in ConTech. What inspired you to start this publication, and what gap did you see it filling in the construction technology space?
Yeah, there's kind of two reasons why I started it. The first was because I personally was always interested in construction technology, and I was like, where can I actually find a really good source of information that tells me about the startups that are being funded, but also the macroeconomic trends that are affecting the industry? So that's why I started it on one hand. But the second reason that I started, and I'd say is the stronger reason, is I noticed a really curious phenomenon in our industry, which is we have more construction technology startups, but really low adoption of those startups. And it seems to me that there isn't an awareness issue. So when I talk to my peers or civil engineers, they're not aware of the construction technology solutions that are out there. So I really want this newsletter to help people increase the adoption of solutions by categorizing all the solutions that are being funded and being really clear on what use case they're solving. And I felt this firsthand, which kind of inspired me to start, which was I was sitting on site doing defect inspections, walking through a pavement system and taking photos of all the defects. And I had to do it by hand, taking photos, writing it up on a sheet set, which you can imagine is just an absolute pain. And when I went online, I realized that there were solutions fixing this problem, but we just weren't aware of them. And there needed to be a way of easily understanding what startups out there, what they do, who they service, and how we could actually go, oh, this is a solution. Maybe I could use it on site. And there wasn't any information resource helping me to solve for that, which is why I started it.
Which makes a lot of sense. And I think, as we were discussing earlier, right, similar reasons for us starting this podcast, just making individuals aware of what's on the market, right, what could potentially solve their challenges. And another lead-up question, right, is from your point of view, right, we've talked about awareness as one of the impediments, but what other impediments or challenges to widespread technology adoption within the construction industry exists today? And like you were saying earlier, if you don't know that the solution exists, it's going to be hard to adopt it.
Yeah, I think on one hand is awareness, which I definitely see and hope that the newsletter helps with. But the other side is education, because once you know that there is a great solution out there, you still need to know how to pilot it effectively. What are the KPIs that track success? How do we actually operationalize the solution into workflow and create it as a habit so every engineer knows exactly when and where to use this solution? And then if it is effective in a pilot, how do we scale it through an organization? And a lot of the construction companies which started offices of innovation, almost a decade ago, have this kind of tribal knowledge stored. And what I do want the newsletter to do in the future is try and have these interview series with experts, getting this great knowledge of how to run an effective pilot or how to run an effective innovation program, and sharing it with the community so that we all understand exactly how we can adopt a solution most effectively on site and actually make sure that the adoption and the use is very high and it's not just limited to people who are excited by technology.
Brilliant. And the part that you touched on about, the actual real world implementation of the solutions, I think is so important, because what we think is going to be, an excellent solution, right, brought through a trial phase or other sort of implementation, can really turn out to have drastically different results when put into a field environment. So I agree. I think testing is a huge part of it, and learning from those who are experts in testing and implementation is something that everybody's going to be able to find valuable. So Bhragan, what emerging technologies or innovative solutions are you most excited about, right? Because you're compiling all these, there's going to be some that are specific to what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure there's others that you find really cool in general, but what is most exciting to you?
Yeah, I guess my answer is a little bit different to what you might expect, but I'm actually really excited by this rising class of bootcamp startups, which essentially what they do is they help people access the industry faster than before by offering an alternative to the 4-year engineering pathway. So the largest pain point and problem that I see in the industry is we have a construction labor shortage, and we need more people to get into the industry, and we need a pathway to get into the industry. And what happened in the early 2010s in software, when there were these issues in coding, is instead of a 4-year degree, you would run a bootcamp for 16 weeks and you would learn on the job, and you complete projects and get matched to a company. And people are doing that with trade schools now, where you get paid for 16 weeks, you get a guaranteed job at the end of it, and you start to work in the industry. And to me, we can use technology, we can use everything, but fundamentally we need more people on the ground who can actually complete these jobs and support us in our roles. And what these apprenticeship programs do is they'll teach you the latest best practices on how to actually use tech in your role every single day. So they're trained really well, and we start to address the jobs gap that's really affecting our industry. And what that I hope will help will, one, increase the adoption of technology because they are trained in the latest best practices, but we now have more people on site so that we can actually complete our jobs faster. Because technology is really an enabler trying to address the fact that we don't have enough people in our industry. But if we can also increase the number of people in our industry, that just helps with the adoption of technology because they're also up trained and skilled in the latest best practices.
That's a two-pronged approach. As I think you've probably heard, there are fears about what is technology going to do? What is AI going to do in terms of taking people's jobs, job security, and eventually some saying, hey, are we going to be replaced? But it sounds like your thought process, Bhragan, is it's something that will supplement us as it is currently, just because we have a shortage of people. But then into the future, there's this element of education, upskilling that plays into the broader picture, is what I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't think technology will replace us. I think the complexity of the construction environment makes it so difficult to automate parts of being on site, right? Like if you've ever been on a job site, it's very difficult to automate all the little finicky tasks, like as simple as tying a dowel down when you're doing a concrete pour. That's something a robot simply can't do. And what we really need is we need robots, or we need technology solutions to automate the tedious tasks that we do. Like for me, in my example, taking photos and having them geo-location tagged when I'm taking defect inspections would save me heaps of time, but it isn't replacing my job. It's augmenting it and reducing some of the busy work that I have to do. And that's how I see technology supporting us in the future. It essentially allows us to do more with less. And because we have a construction labor shortage, that's why it's really effective. And that's the messaging I think a lot of startups need to make sure that they do and tell people in startup. It's like, hey, we're actually helping you to complete your job faster. We're not replacing you. And I think this entire conversation around disruption in the construction industry should be changed to, hey, like, we're just trying to help you do your job faster. We're trying to save you time and make sure that you're not spending all day on a job site.
Love it. And speaking of messaging, one thing I've been thinking about is the traditional way that tech markets and messages based on different platforms, and coming into the engineering or construction environments with promise of, right, disruption, 10x, all of the typical terms we hear. I don't know that it works really well. And I think there is a different messaging that's needed, particularly when you have, right, a class of individuals who are generally resistant to change for one reason or another. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But regardless, I do think there is a different message, as you've mentioned, that needs to be portrayed to ultimately be successful in our industry.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful and important to have a person from construction as a founder of a startup, because they understand that messaging well. And there is two prongs of messaging, and this is what I guess confuses startups, is when you're talking to the investor who's going to invest in your startup, you need to be like, I'm going to disrupt the industry. I need X, like, I'm going to change the way that we operate, and I'm going to automate everything. So for them, they get really excited when you talk about that. But if you go to a person on site and the people that you're selling to, they don't care about any of that. And quite often, you don't even want to admit that you're a startup. You want to appear like you're an existing company who's doing really well, and you're just a service business supporting these companies. Because for them, they just want to get the job done. They don't really mind how it gets completed. So you could appear as a technology-enabled subcontractor rather than a startup. And that's a really effective way of getting adopted and used on site. But just removing the disruption conversation from people on site is really important, because as an industry, we're relationship-based. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone's been working with everyone for years. No one wants to talk to the new person who comes on site, who's never been on site, and starts talking about how they're going to replace everyone on site with, the new technology. No one's going to use you.
And no one's going to listen either. And as you alluded to, making yourself look and sound more like a peer than an adversary is going to go a long way. And again, as you mentioned, the people on site are trying to get something done, right? It's a job. They could care less about your 10x business model, how many investors you have, how much money you've raised, et cetera. There's a key need that your product solves, and that's ultimately what end users care about.
And especially if you come from another part of the technology sphere, the way you get adopted on construction is very different, right? It's a high ticket sales environment. It's a long sales cycle. It doesn't just naturally get plug and play adopted. You need this entire training and relationship component to make sure people are using it on site. But in other industries, if you've got a Slack or a messaging platform, people just start using it. So it's really easy to be like, oh, I can disrupt it and I can just get viral growth. But I haven't really seen that play out very effectively within our industry. Like, there are marketplaces that do have that growth vector, but if you're a solution helping people on site, you have a training component, you have a relationship component. That's very important to understand.
And I think that also speaks to just the general makeup of who produces what or owns what in the construction industry, right? Like, if you said there was one company who had a 1% share of all construction activity, right? That would be enormous. And there's so many, there's a number of books and other resources on this topic of how many small and fragmented players there are versus, when you think of ride sharing, right? Like at a national global level, you think of most likely a few select companies, but that's just not the way that our industry tends to operate. Very fragmented, very segmented, and mom and pop, for a more colloquial term.
Yeah, and it's the way regulation is pushed it towards, right? Like, as you get bigger, it seems like you have diseconomies of scale. So for us in Australia, in Queensland and Victoria, two different states, you have to be registered locally in that state to actually complete engineering activities. And there's an entire process. So if you are a nationwide company, you actually need to pay for registration in multiple states for each of your engineers to simply deliver. So the regulation and the building code changes from state to state, from council to council. So it is very difficult to have that nationwide adoption depending on the solution that you have. But there's going to be so many small players who need that handheld support and relationships and training. As we've said, education is so important.
And that's pretty much right. The law and the economics of architecture, engineering, and construction make it a great industry to work in. There is a certain level of job security, as you mentioned, right? It's unlikely that a big player is just going to come in and gobble up large amounts of market share. And I think that could be some messaging that startups take advantage of, because it's, hey, like, we probably can't come in and disrupt the way you would expect a traditional tech model to come in and do so. So instead, we're going to come in and work with you to make you more successful, relationship-based business, as you mentioned. And I think that's what ends up getting deals done, products used, and end users satisfied.
And the most effective startups that I've seen started as consulting companies. They started as service businesses, helping a range of their companies in various solutions. And they go, oh, we continuously help our clients with this same problem set. Let's just build a product around it. And they already have the relationships, so they already start scaling, and they already understand their customers. So they're really effective at rolling out their solutions.
That's right. And I really like this conversation and kind of where you've, right? So you've got the newsletter, you're right, making appearances on podcasts like ours, which again, we thank you for taking the time out today to do so. But looking ahead, what are your other goals or aspirations for the ConTech space? And how do you hope to contribute to the continuing growth and development of it?
Yeah, I think, well, on one side is continuing to work in the industry. So I do love being an engineer. And on the other side, continuing to grow the newsletter and having it service some of the pain points, which we've talked about in this conversation, which I really think is supporting the growth of education and training. And what I mean by that is by providing a platform for experts in the space and construction technology experts to write about some of their experiences, some of their lessons learned in adopting solutions. And a series of guest posts that I've been trying to curate and trying to write is this entire idea of, we have this new role called the construction technologist. And there's a series of best practices associated with this emerging role, and no one's really codified it. So can we get all these experts to jump on to write articles and be like, hey, this is the best way that we create a pilot program. These are the best metrics to view when you're running a pilot program. This is how we do process mapping and figure out how a solution can be adopted on site. And then this is how we scale it through multiple different project teams. And these are the best practices. And hopefully by doing that, we create a resource that people at all the mom and pops or all the smaller engineering firms can look at and be like, oh, this is how the big firm did it. We can actually copy this, and this will help us to digitize as well. Because there's a rising class of consultants supporting independently construction technology adoption, but a lot of the smaller engineering firms just don't have the budget to actually pay for these people. So we need a way of providing them access into information at a really accessible cost, or, you know, at some kind of free version, just so that they can start using technology as well. Because if we continue to only focus on really the top end of the market, that's such a small part of the market that we're never really going to get technology adoption and ultimately like improvements in our industry at the level that we want it to. So that's really what I hope the newsletter starts to grow into.
And do you see this certification, maybe not similar to like a PE or PEng, but something that, let's say, an individual can take in a reasonable amount of time and get an accreditation from some sort of accrediting body, is what it sounds like to me?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about it down the track in that sense, but I do know people who are looking at setting up courses on, this is what a construction technologist body of knowledge is. This is what the skill framework is. This is what we need to teach them. So I would not be surprised if this becomes exactly what you're saying, a certification around, these are the best practices for becoming a construction technologist. And this is how you go from, you know, a site role or even external to the industry or a different role to supporting the adoption of technology on site. And that isn't just limited to understanding solutions. It's also understanding organizational change, how to effectively run training for people on site, and how to do process mapping. There's an entire skills framework that needs to be mapped out, and then a course developed off the back of that.
And also just understanding construction, right? I think that's a that can be a big one that individuals miss. And just in my personal experience in speaking to startups that are led or founded by individuals who aren't from construction, it can pretty negatively impact what they're doing. Because if somebody doesn't take you seriously because you don't speak the language of construction, right, it is detrimental.
Yeah. And like I said, I think in traditional startups, they always say you need a software co-founder. I think having a construction co-founder or a construction first hire is really important, because even for myself, I haven't seen an entire project lifecycle, right? I plug into very small components of it, but someone who understands the project lifecycle, exactly where the solution should be used, which sector within construction should be used, it's a really complex environment. Even for me, understanding what a site engineer is doing as being on the construction phase side of a design company, it took me like 2 to 3 months to understand exactly what they do in their role. And it's very difficult for someone who isn't on site every day working with these people to really understand what they're doing.
Absolutely. Bhragan, again, thank you so much for your time. This has actually been one of my favorite conversations, just because of the level of detail we've gone into, the topics we've discussed. But what I wanted to ask you is our last question for today. What piece of advice would you give to engineers who are eager to integrate more tech into their practice, but might be hesitant to take the first step?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I could speak to a little bit of my own story when I was really interested in technology, but I had absolutely no idea on how to start. So what I actually did is I went through my AECOM address book and I found everyone with a digital manager or digital executive, and I just cold emailed them. And because technology is such a new and emerging landscape, pretty much every single person responded and put time on my calendar. And just from those conversations, it led to the opportunity to create workshops on digital learning inside of AECOM, or other opportunities to support these people on projects. So I think the first step, if you are interested, is taking action. And the easiest way to take action is to talk people inside of your company whose roles are related to digital. And because these people find it so hard to get adoption, because so many people are just doing their jobs and either resistant to change or not excited by technology, they will absolutely love to have you as a supporter and be like, I have 10 projects I need help on it. Here's exactly how you can help me. And that's how I got my foot in the door and how I really started, supporting in technology roles. And I got my recent role in innovation. So I think just that first step of find the person in your company who owns it and send them an email, or just pester them until you get a meeting with them.
I concur. And speaking from experience, like if there is no one, right, you can try to take baby steps, or in some instances, right, you may meet people online or at conferences and figure out maybe where your place should be, if not where you currently are. So great advice there. And Bhragan, what is the best way for listeners to connect with you? Let's say, they don't have someone in their company who they could turn to and just want to learn more from you. Where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely. One is on LinkedIn. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn these days, just given the newsletter as well. And then the second thing is, if you sign up to the newsletter and you respond to an email in the newsletter, I'll always respond back. So just respond to me on a newsletter if you receive it, or just drop me a DM on LinkedIn and I'll always try and respond if I've got the time.
Beautiful. And we'll include all that information in the show notes for anyone who's listening and doesn't have a pen handy. But Bhragan, thank you again so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Thanks. Likewise, Nick. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Till next time. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you will find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering and technology endeavors. Thank you.